My name's Wolf, and through this series of videos I'm going to introduce you to the crazy over-the-top world that nerds like me love so much, that is Warhammer 40,000. So get comfy, buckle in and prepare for a Noob-Splaining session. So firstly, I've been advised by many people that I need to do this within the first 2 minutes of the video. So if you're not subscribed, please do, and at the end of the video let me know if you like it or dislike it, and finally leave a comment. At this moment my channel is small enough that I can respond to all the comments, and I've had some absolutely brilliant ones so far, so keep them coming. The more sarcastic the better. Now, for something a little more serious. So I must be making an impression on the 40k lore tuber community, as it appears that someone is taking parts of my videos and either changing the wording just slightly or just straight up saying the same thing. And I'm not talking about the actual lore, I'm referring to statements and comments made outside the lore. Now, as Oscar Wilde who said, imitation is the sincerest form of flattery that mediocrity can pay to greatness. So with that out of the way, let's get on with the Warhammer stuff, shall we? And let's see if the number of direct quotes of me elsewhere drop sharply. Now, welcome to the part 2 of the history of mankind. If you've not seen the part 1, I'll try and remember to put a link to it in the description, but this video editing stuff is hard and I'll probably forget. So here we are in the year 30,000, and the Emperor of Mankind and the Mechanicum of Mars have made a deal, and so the Imperium of Man is born. Mars supplies the gear and the Emperor supplies the soldiers, in the form of 20 legions of genetically enhanced super soldiers, that are the Space Marines, along with bucket loads of ordinary human soldiers. First thing they do as a proof of concept is reconquer the Sol system. That's our solar system if you didn't know. Now that goes swimmingly well, but like I've said in previous videos, this is 40k, and 40k has its own version of Murphy's Law, which states anything that can go to ratshit will go to ratshit. So, the legions are split up into many different fleets, some consisting of Space Marines from multiple different legions, but each of the fleets has a massive contingent of normal human soldiers vastly outnumbering the Space Marines, although the Space Marines will do the bulk of the fighting. And of course all the support ships needed for such an endeavour. Now all these fleets head off in different directions with two main goals. 1. Reconquer the whole galaxy in the name of humanity. Again. And find all the missing Primarchs that were earlier flung across the galaxy by the Chaos Gods, possibly with some inside help. Now this was known as the Great Crusade, although technically it was the second time that the galaxy had been conquered by humanity, so I suppose the second Great Crusade would be more accurate, but hey. Now the Great Crusade was a massive success, and the Emperor himself even joined in. His fleets just happened to turn up at the same time as another fleet arrived in the system that just happened to have one of the missing Primarchs. It's an amazing coincidence that. It's almost as if the Emperor is psychic. Oh wait. So we jump forward a few years, and with all the Primarchs now leading their respective legions, the galaxy is mostly conquered. But that's mainly because there's not as many bad guys yet. The Tau at this stage have only just discovered fire. The Necrons are still having a 60,000 year nap. The Eldar have pretty much wiped themselves off the map while preparing the court documents for their name change to Eldari and Drukhari. And there is an element of truth in there, something to do with copyrights. The Squats or Space Dwarves are busy drinking beer, singing about gold and mining ores for the Mechanicum, and nobody's buying their models, which at the time were frankly shit, and the Tyranids haven't arrived yet, and the Chaos Demons are still stuck in the warp. So that pretty much just leaves the Orcs. So with all the Primarchs back in charge, a massive final battle against the biggest Orc horde, referred to by the Orcs as a WAH, because it sounds like war, which apparently is funny. Anyway, key, massive, huge, glorious battle. Orcs get their arses kicked, but only just, it was a close one. After the battle then, the Emperor announces that he is returning home to Terra, as he's got some super secret shit to do. In his place he is going to be naming one of his Primarchs, specifically his favourite, Horus Lupercal, as the War Master, to take over as the overall general of what's left of the Crusade. This announcement resulted in several 100,000 Space Marines crying as Grandad was going home. Probably. Now you've probably heard of the Horus Heresy, even if you know nothing about it. Now while there were many key events before and during the time called the Horus Heresy, only a few of them have shaped the way 40k is today. The Horus Heresy itself was such a key event that it even spawned its own board game called the Horus Heresy, lovingly referred to as fans by 30k. So this is the part where I try to take 50 plus books and way more lore and compress it all down into roughly 5 minutes. And this is also the bit where we start referring heavily to lots of the Primarchs and some of the other characters. So if you're not a 40k expert and you haven't watched my last video introducing them, you need to go watch that now. If I remember, I will put a link in the description. That's 2 links I've got to remember to put in the description. Right, Horus Heresy then. At this point, remember, we're down to 18 legions because of the Purged and the Forgotten. But it all starts really with Lorgar Aurelian, the Primarch of the Wordbearers. One of his special skills, in fact his only special skill, is that he was a religious nutjob who worshipped the Emperor as a god, and his marines were no different. Every world they reconquered during the Great Crusade, the Wordbearers would spend a long time setting up the religion to the population. Eventually it was noticed how slow Lorgar was at conquering planets, and when the Emperor found out what Lorgar was doing, he was pretty pissed off, especially as he had actively dismantled every religion and Lorgar was now building a new one. So the Emperor, his custodes, and Robuta Guilliman with his Ultramarines headed out to where Lorgar was giving his latest sermon. The plan was for the Emperor to slap the stupid out of Lorgar, and slap him he did, but not hard enough to remove all the stupid. So while Lorgar was acting as a good boy again and conquering planets at an acceptable rate, two of his trusted space marines, Erebus and Corferin, who it turns out secretly worship Chaos, convinced Lorgar to go to a planet where he could talk directly to the primordial powers, better known to us as the Chaos Gods. Now, being a religious nutjob and not fully having all the stupid slapped out of him, but he does still have the insane need to have to believe in a god, but clearly he can't worship his dad anymore, Lorgar decided that visiting that planet would be a good thing to do. So when Lorgar discovers there isn't just one, but 4 Chaos Gods, he's more excited than a Catholic priest at a choir boy convention. So when the Chaos Gods collectively offered him a certain appendage to suck on, he started gobbling that appendage out of sheer spite for his dad the Emperor. The 4 Chaos Gods all gave Lorgar a little bit of their power, to give him a massive power boost. Now the Primarchs, as they are all well above the power level of a normal Space Marine, still vary in power wildly to each other. Turns out Lorgar was a massive pathetic little bitch in the first place, and his power-ups from the Chaos Gods still didn't put him in the top 15. With Lorgar now corrupted as a proof of concept, the Chaos Gods using Erebus and Lorgar put a plan in place to corrupt Horus Lupercal, now the War Master. If they could turn the Emperor's chosen son, that would be a massive win for them. They did. This time they didn't hold back with the amount of power-ups they gave him. The Chaos Gods then remembered they don't like each other much, and definitely don't like to share, so they decided they each want their own Primarch and set about corrupting one each personally. Khorne chose Angron, Nurgle chose Mortarion, Tzeentch chose Magnus, and Slaanesh, when it remembered to put some clothes on and stop playing with itself in public, chose Fulgrim. With 6 legions now turned to Chaos, Horus went about making sure 3 more joined his side, even if they were not fully corrupted. Then he started a massive civil war in an attempt to kill the Emperor and take his throne. The only battle of this war was called the Dropside Massacre, because they were massacred at a drop site. 3 of the Loyalist legions were completely and utterly destroyed and taken off the board, as well as Vulcan, the Primarch of the Salamanders, was captured, and Ferrus Manus, the Primarch of the Iron Hands, was killed. Over the next 20 years the Loyalists got some victories, but it was clear that Horus and his sides were winning as they got closer and closer and closer to Earth. At the final battle at Earth, Horus managed to kill Sanguinius, the Primarch of the Blood Angels, and then the Emperor blasts Horus into oblivion, but not before Horus mortally wounds the Emperor, causing the Emperor to be interred onto the Golden Throne, which acts as his life support for the next 10,000 years, leaving him only able to use his psychic abilities, mainly to power the Astronomicon, which is basically a giant lighthouse in the warp to help with warp travel. With Horus dead, the traitor legions run like hell to the far corners of the galaxy or back into the warp itself through the Eye of Terror, and with the galaxy shattered again by this massive civil war, the surviving Loyalist forces proceed to hunt down and destroy any surviving traitor forces and recapture any planets that turn to Horus. This was known as the Great Scouring, and that's now 3 times the galaxy has been reconquered. Now the Imperium lost that much tech and resources due to this massive war, it would never fully recover, and so would stagnate for the next 10,000 years. The main thing we take away from the Horus heresy that affects the current setting is some of the Primarchs are now dead, half-turned traitor, with their legions, so we get Chaos Space Marines as a playable faction, and the Emperor is a giant psychic light bulb, and nobody wants to invent anything new. That's the TLDR version of the Horus heresy, and is skipping so much story and lore that we can cover that in a greater deal another day, but it doesn't really affect the current setting. But it is always good to know the full history of each of the factions. Now that the Great Scouring is completed, Reboot Guilliman and the High Lords of Terror decide that a legion is just way too much power for any one person to control, and so it is decreed that now all of the surviving Loyalist Space Marine legions are to be broken down into chapters that consist of 1,000 Marines. Now some of the legions do this willingly, some do this reluctantly. But they all do it except the Space Wolves, because the Space Wolves just don't believe any of the rules apply to them. It's just to the other legions. Now that's a level of arrogance we'll deal with in another video. So now we have the Space Marine chapters and not the legions, giving us loads more chapters, each with their own individual flavour. For example, the Black Templars, who are absolute religious zealots, unlike their founding chapter, the Imperial Fists, who like making sandcastles. This also means that you, as a player, can now create your own chapter and make up which original legion they are from, and which chapter's rules or playstyle you wish to use, whilst also having your own custom paint job, which is why the 2 missing Primarchs were now redundant. Now this is known as a homebrew chapter, and there have been some absolutely great homebrew ones over the years, as well as the official releases from Games Workshop. So now we're starting to see the foundations of the current setting, but originally Games Workshop decided that the Primarchs were too powerful to be on the battlefield. So the remaining traitor Primarchs disappeared into the warp, never to be heard from again, while the remaining loyalist ones were sidelined. So Layman Russ, Primarch of the Space Wolves, and Corvus Corax, Primarch of the Raven Guard, just fucked off into the warp to hunt traitors. Rogel Dawn is presumed dead after being attacked by a massive Chaos fleet, and Jagatai Khan of the White Scars was last seen charging into the Eldar webway, chasing some Drukhari whilst presumably yelling Banzai. Vulcan, who was thought dead, turns out he's a perpetual like the Emperor, has supposedly been sighted here and there but nothing official. Lionel Johnson, who was tired from the killing of all the traitors, went for a nap for about 10,000 years, and Fulgrim, who is now a Demon Primarch, popped up briefly just to cut Raboot Guilliman's neck with a poison blade, forcing Raboot to be placed in stasis for the next 10,000 years. So, with the surviving loyalist Primarch sidelined, it was time to bring the rest of the factions in or back up to spec. The Orcs are still spread out everywhere in the galaxy, and are by far the most numerous of any of the races, but they spend that much time fighting each other, they're considered more of an annoyance than a threat. But every so often we would get a Mega Orc that starts a crusade, or a Wah, as they call it, before the Imperium gets its shit together and slap them down. The Tyranids arrive in the galaxy, and the first thing they do is eat the population of the planet Tyran, which is how they got their name. They then went on to eat the Squats, taking them out of the game, and thank fuck they're horrible models. The Tau evolved from learning how to make fire to making firepower that is arguably the best in the game. The Necrons woke up from their 60,000 year nap and decided they want their land back, and throughout all this, Abaddon the Despoiler, who has taken over Horus's old job as being in charge of Chaos, keeps launching Black Crusades to remind us that Chaos is still the big bad. As big, scary and dangerous as Abaddon is supposed to be, in reality he is about as much use and effective as tits on a flat fish. During this time we also got some more playable human factions, in the form of the Sisters of Battle, lovingly referred to as nuns with guns. The Imperial Guard and the Adeptus Mechanicum also got a massive overhaul to their army lists. The Grey Knights were no longer considered a support faction and were given their own army list, and the Custodes were even released out into the wild. And this is how 40k was for about 10,000 years in-game, and for about 25-ish years in the real world. Now the first edition of 40k was something called Rogue Trader, and was more of a skirmish roleplay game. It wasn't until 2nd edition came out that it became the full-on armies that we know and love, and 2nd edition is what most players consider to be the true 1st edition. Throughout the years we had multiple new editions, all the way up to 7th edition, but nothing really changed. The core gameplay was the same as it pretty much is today. Some of the rules have evolved, like how vehicles work, but around the time of the release of 8th edition, Games Workshop did something they haven't done before. They moved the storyline along, and since then they've kept it moving to the point we're actually in the year 41k now. Now the main thing that happened was Abaddon launched his 13th Black Crusade, and managed to destroy the planet Cadia, which was basically the checkpoint Charlie for anything trying to leave the Eye of Terror. Turns out there was some ancient tech buried on this planet that stopped the Eye of Terror growing, and with Cadia now destroyed, the Eye of Terror turned into the Great Rift and effectively split the galaxy in half, and allowing the forces of Chaos to rampage unchecked all across the galaxy. They also brought back Magnus the Red and Mortarion as playable demon princes / Primarchs for the Chaos forces. Now, just before Cadia was destroyed, Belisarius Call of the Mechanicum was led away from the planet through the webway by some Eldar allies to Macragge, the homeworld of the Ultramarines, where Guilliman is on display in stasis, complete with his slashed throat like some macabre piece of art. So Call releases Guilliman from stasis and equips him with a set of power armour that is augmented with Eldar technology to heal his wounds and help him fight off the poison that has infected his body. It is at this point it is then revealed that before Raboot was shanked in the throat, he instructed Call to start making improvements to the gene seed of the Space Marines and also the standard gear they use. So secretly, for the last 10,000 years, Kull just happened to be making Primaris Space Marines and stashing them in stasis, whilst trying to figure out a way of bringing back the Primarch. 8th edition hit shelves, along with the 2 Chaos Primarchs, Magnus and Mortarion, and also the only Loyalist Primarch, Rabute Guilliman, and the new Primaris Marines. In-game, Rabute ordered the Indomitus Crusade, where he went round and personally handed over Primaris Marines to each Space Marine chapter, along with the instruction booklet on how to make their own Primaris Marines, and also to reconquer the galaxy from the rampaging forces of Chaos. So that's 4 times now the galaxy has been conquered by the humans. You could see why some of the other races think of us like a cockroach infestation that just won't die. Initially, the Primaris were met by the fanbase with scepticism as a blatant attempt to get the Space Marine players, who make up the bulk of the player base, to buy more Space Marines. And basically it was. Technically, if you had an army from 2nd edition, you could still use that army today in 8th, and Games Workshop is a business designed to make money from selling models. So with no reason to buy new models, why would you? Well, the Primaris Marines got better rules, so were more powerful on the tabletop, and they're also physically bigger models than their Firstborn Marine counterparts, and with way more detail, making them an absolute joy to paint. It's also the major point in the history where the Ultramarines and their blue armour were suddenly fucking everywhere. Before this, the Ultramarines were about, but shared the limelight with the Dark Angels and the Space Wolves, but it was really the Blood Angels who hogged all the spotlight. Very few players showed any interest in any of the other Loyalist chapters, because compared to the main 4 they were frankly boring or just horrible colours to paint. I mean, red armoured space vampires or yellow armoured builders of tree forts. Move forward a few years, and then we got 9th edition, and the main thing that brought was the stupid idea of power levels instead of points, which I'm convinced 99% of the player base just totally ignored as it was a bloody stupid rule. For example, a squad of 5 tactical marines was 5 power points, all armed with bolters. You make one a sergeant, give one a rocket launcher and one a flamer, and it's still 5 power points. You add a 6th model, it's now 10 power points. Add another 4 to make it a squad of 10, and it's still 10 power points. Take the rocket launcher and flamer away and give those marines their bolters back, and demote the sergeant, and you guessed it, it's still 10 power points. This edition we also got the reveal that the Tyranids didn't eat all the squats, and now they're back as the Leagues of Votan. With the recent announcement that 10th edition is on its way, and to help with the hype, the latest set of storylines has introduced another Chaos Primarch, the Demon Prince Angron. Another Chaos Big Bad in the form of the Warpforged ruler Vashtor, who wants to be a Chaos God, and finally the Loyalist Primarch Lionel Johnson, who was having a nice little nap, woke up and found he can teleport anywhere, and so he's been kicking ass and taking names, and he's not interested in any more names. And there we have it, the complete history of humanity in-game and the history of the game to some extent as well. Now that all this is covered, you should have enough of the basics down to understand everything you need to know about Space Marines. And so it's time to move on to one of the other factions, which leaves us with a choice. It's either the Eldar and their fall from grace, or the real threat to the galaxy that if they ever unite, that is the Orcs. I'll leave it up to you, put it in the comments. And there we have it. Don't forget to like, subscribe and leave a comment. Better still, if you know somebody who could do with a bit of noob-splaining on Warhammer, and share this video with them. And at any point, if you learned something or laughed, then please hit that subscribe button. I won't ever be doing a Patreon or a merch store, so that subscribe button is the best way you can show your support and thanks from me.